Good evening and welcome to Q&A. I'm Tony Jones and here to answer your questions tonight, journalist and commentator David Marr, whose latest essay, Faction Man, tracks Bill Shorten's path to power. The Executive Director of the Institute of Public Affairs, John Roskam. The Shadow Minister for Health, Catherine King. Deputy Nationals Leader and Minister for Agriculture, Barnaby Joyce. And the Director of the Museum of Contemporary Art, Elizabeth Ann Macgregor. Please welcome our panel. As always, there's plenty to talk about. Let's go straight to our first question. It's from Veronica Hopley.
My question is for Barnaby Joyce. Did Malcolm Turnbull do the right thing by ousting Tony Abbott?
Well, it's an easy one to start with. Look, to be honest, I don't like the process of changing leaders in by reason of the intrigue of a parliament or members of parliament. But it's part of the process, and now we work with the process. I think that to be honest, these sort of occurrences don't bring out the best of characters. They bring out the worst because it becomes a world of intrigue. I know that Catherine has lived through two of them, and now I've lived through one.
We also know what happens next.
And now I want to make sure that we just get back to business and start working as hard as we possibly can. Both within the cabinet, I've always believed there were two giants in the room. One was Abbott and one was Turnbull. We've had Abbott, now we've got Turnbull.
So can I get you to ask the question, or answer the question?
I can ask lots of questions.
No, answer the question. Did Malcolm Turnbull do the right thing? It's a very simple one. You can give a straightforward answer to that.
He was allowed to do it, and that's part of the process. He is allowed. There are two checks and balances on power. One is you people, and the other one is within the government itself. That is their right. They exercise their right. My job is now to work with Malcolm Turnbull and try and make sure that we've got the best government we can possibly deserve.
Do you believe it was the right thing?
Well, I've said that I don't believe it is right. I said it right at the start. I don't believe it is right to change leaders through a process of intrigue. I think that what would have been better, to be honest, is if Tony had stepped down, if it became, and it was becoming quite clear that the polls were saying that it was unlikely he would be able to win. I don't think Tony would have taken us over a cliff. I think that the proper process would have been Tony stepping down, and then Malcolm has always been the obvious heir apparent, and that would have been the preferable path for me. And so there is a straight answer.
All right, let's go to our next question. We'll bring the other panellists in after that. It's from John Noir. There is.
Thanks, Dan. After Prime Minister Turnbull's treachery in the night and the immediate boost it gave to the polls, it is clear the country is beginning to lean heavily to the left. As a Conservative voter, how can I have my voice heard before it is too late and the damage is irreparable?
John Roskam, I'll start with you.
Oh, look, I'm not sure about that. Malcolm Turnbull is going to be judged by results. Malcolm Turnbull has said that many of the economic settings that Tony Abbott put in place are going to be followed. Look, it's undoubted that Malcolm Turnbull has generated goodwill, has generated enthusiasm. He's optimistic about Australia, as I am. Now the challenge is for Malcolm Turnbull to take that goodwill and institute change, tax reform, improve industrial relations, make Australia more productive and make Australia a better country. He's absolutely right to be optimistic. I think that's a good, positive change.
David Marr, I'm not sure that the questioner was especially optimistic about this, but what's your view? I mean, is he right the country has now moved to the left?
A little bit, just a little bit. No. I mean, one of the reasons Tony Abbott failed is that his presentation of the notion of what Australia is just doesn't square with Australians. That gap that was showing up week after week after month in the polls, that steady gap was really the Australian nation saying, we don't see ourselves like you do. And he saw himself, for his clique within the Liberal Party room, the Liberal Party party room, was an ultra-conservative view of this country, with dangers everywhere and threats everywhere and the need for vigorous action and fighting, and that kind of combative view of this country ultimately didn't wash. It was a very ultra-conservative view, a view of the right. Now, Malcolm Turnbull brings things back a little bit more towards the mainstream of Australia. But I wouldn't remotely call that left wing. No, it's not. The left wing is something else entirely. It's just not as conservative as it was, and we have yet to see, of course, what his party room will actually allow him to do.
Let's quickly go back to our questioner. John, are you saying you believe your voice has been sort of stolen away by this leadership change? Or your capacity to have a voice?
I do. I honestly believe that the people of Australia voted for Tony Abbott, and I had an idea of what Tony Abbott was before he was elected, and it didn't change throughout the course of his prime ministership. So, yeah.
Okay, Liz Ann Macgregor, I'll hear from you first, and then Barnaby is ready to leap in, I think.
Well, I think that David is exactly right. And I think these terms right and left are really problematic now, because in so many different ways politicians can embrace some policies that you as a Conservative might agree with, and other policies that people who might traditionally be from the left might disagree with. So it is a little more complex, and I think David's nailed it. It has to be about a new vision of Australia and appealing to a broad consensus, both within his own party but also within the country. And I think that's something that we've seen some very positive signs, and the fact that it's optimistic, and even just saying good things about it's great to be in Australia and be working and living here as I do. And I don't think it shows that the country's moving to the left. We have a very popular Conservative government here in New South Wales, for example. So I think there are these checks and balances.
Barnaby Joyce.
Well, it's a truism in politics that everybody thinks they're in the centre, and it's the reality that we're not. I think there is a government that could be vastly further more conservative, and I think Cory Bernardi is a clear example of that. And I think everybody's entitled to their space. But Tony Abbott had an incredibly hard job. He had to come in at a time, deliver on some key objectives. One was, as I said, stopping the boats, and everyone said it couldn't be done. He did it. He said that the carbon tax couldn't be repealed. He repealed it. We had to make some strong statements about trying to turn around the budget trajectory that we were on, because if we didn't, we were going to go broke. We did that. And of course, Tony ended up suffering the sins of all that. And obviously, the die was set. As I said, the cast became baked, and he couldn't move away from that perception that was then drawn because of the hard decisions he had to make. And I think he suffered because of it.
Barnaby, the questioner asked, how can I have my voice heard before it's too late? The damage is irreparable, my Conservative voice in his case. And now you're in coalition with a Turnbull-led Liberal Party. Do you think it's going to be up to the National Party to hold the line on conservatism?
Well, I think that the National Party has a strong role to play, and I think that we, suppose, are socially more conservative than the Liberal Party. I think that would be accepted. There are certainly people within the National Party that are not. In the National Party, we don't hold to you having to live or die by the rules of the communal room. You can have your own views. In fact, we're the ones who have the greatest capacity for how to express that and whether you can cross the floor or not, more so than any other party. We truly believe in the liberty of the individual. And I think within that forum, we are generally more conservative than the Libs, but what we really concentrate on is regional people and regional areas and looking after them. Our constituents are the poorest. That's one thing we do know. And so that we're always looking out for them.
Catherine King, I'll bring you in. And if the question is right and there's been a shift to the left, that means the Liberal Party is now occupying ground that you would otherwise occupy in the centre.
Well, I think what you've got to look at is what is the price that was extracted for the votes that Turnbull got in order to become Prime Minister. And I think increasingly what you've seen over time is that the Liberal Party has become far more conservative. There are far more individual members who I would say at much further right in the party than when I first came in over 14 years ago now. So I suspect there won't be much movement on a whole raft of issues. We've already seen that debate when it comes to climate change, same-sex marriage. And I think that's the sad thing. I think that there is some optimism because of just how terrible things were. And I think that, the fighting that was going on, the way in which Abbott really was leading the country into a path that many people did not want to see. And, I'm very glad that he has gone. Sorry, Barnaby, I know that you are not. But I'm very glad that he has gone from my point of view, particularly from the health perspective. I think he was doing terrible damage there, but that continues. And I think that, unfortunately, what people's optimism is going to see over the longer term, the more that Turnbull's there and the more we get to see what he's actually going to do is what John's just said. He's going to continue with exactly what Tony Abbott was doing, which may give you some comfort, but I suspect for the rest of Australia, not so much so.
Let's quickly go back to Barnaby. You mentioned Corey Bernardi there, and some on the right have urged him to start his own right-wing party. I don't know, Corey Bernardi's Golden Dawn or something. Do you think this will happen?
No, I don't. I think that the Liberal Party itself has a wide church. It has factions that are to the right. There are factions that are to the left. There are certainly sections of the Liberal Party that are to the left of Malcolm. There are sections, obviously, to the right of Tony Abbott. And so that's what you want. You don't want to be, one size fits all. You've got to have the capacity for there to be that expressions of a wide variety of views. Otherwise, you will have new parties starting up. And one of the things I've always railed against Tony is this idea that if you so-called cross the floor or do anything against the view of the party, that you are immediately expelled. That is a view of the Labor Party. Cross the floor, they kick you out. The Greens, never seen them split it on the vote yet. And I think that itself lends it to only one view of one party. And that's ridiculous. We live in the 21st century. We should be brave enough to accept that people have different opinions and at times they express them.
Actually, we just should remind ourselves that Malcolm Turnbull actually crossed the floor, I think, on the emissions trading scheme.
And they made him Prime Minister.
Interesting to see if everyone crosses back the other side with him. Yeah. We'll have to wait and see. You're watching Q&A, where we encourage panellists to stick to the facts. If you hear any doubtful claims tonight, send a tweet using the hashtags FactCheck and Quanda. Now, last week's tweets generated a fact check on inequality by The Conversation, so keep an eye on our Twitter account for future fact checks. The next question comes from Josh Kirsch.
My question is for David Marr. In your quarterly essay on Bill Shorten, you show a rise through the political ranks that displays betrayal and at times cruelty. Do you think this is a unique story, or does it reflect what all politicians go through to get to our national stage?
It is not a unique story. Betrayal is part of political careers. I'm not spruiking for betrayal when I say that one of the reasons that Bill Shorten has risen so swiftly to the very top of the Labor Party, I mean, 20 years ago, that man was a rookie organiser for the AWU and he's now the leader of the opposition. It's been very swift. But his betrayals have been shrewd. He's known who to leave behind. He's known who to join. There's a pattern through his career of him dumping old friends and dumping colleagues, but picking the right people to join. The ones who are the stayers, the professionals, the ones who are going to go far. I'm not suggesting that it's an attractive way of life, but it is a characteristic of politics. It even happens in the National Party. And it's not been unknown in the Liberal Party as well. We saw it on display. In fact, only, how long ago was it? Was it 5 years or 2 weeks? I can't remember.
1 week.
But betrayal moves politics on. It's part of it.
David, if you were to pick a seminal moment in this shortish rise to the Labor leadership that best explains Bill Shorten's character, what would it be?
His public character was standing at the pit head at Beaconsfield when two of the members of the AWU were trapped under fallen rock a long way underground, and he was able to talk to Australia. He was able to tell people what was going on. Nobody else could or would. He told people what was going on. It made him a public figure. That was an incredibly important moment for him in his career. But most of his career has actually been spent out of sight. I call him a man from nowhere. First in a union and then in the factions, the weird, wild, crazy faction world of Victoria. And I think in that world, the moment was the successful pre-selection for a very safe Labor seat in the Melbourne suburbs. It's when he got the pre-selection for Maribyrnong, which was a bloody, extraordinary battle which took years, involved 6 seats being overturned, involved branch stackers on all sides, involved extraordinary support from industrialists as well as unionists. That, I think, was the key campaign, the key incident in his career which showed what he could do. He's moved forward from there.
John Roskam, now you've known Bill Shorten. You were at school, since you're at school
Since
together.
grade 6, Tony.
Grade 6. So you debated with him. How do you assess his character?
Well, I would share many of David's views about politics. What Bill Shorten has done in politics is no different from National Party or Liberal Party MPs. It happens in business, it happens in classrooms, on the sporting field. I agree with David. Beaconsfield was the very best of Bill Shorten as a communicator. There's many things that I disagree with Bill Shorten on, but he communicated, and arguably it was the best of the Labor movement. The challenge now for Bill Shorten is he's managing a party that is increasingly going left. It's not the party of Hawke, it's not the party of Keating, it's not the party of reform. It's now a party that seems to be in thrall to a union movement. It's a party that seems to be turning its back on the world. Now, the challenge for Bill Shorten is to rise above it and improve the quality of politics and policy in Australia.
Now, on the surface, at least, you and he, politically and philosophically,
quite different.
Chalk and cheese, one would have thought.
But friends can disagree.
Well, is that really true, or is he secretly further on your side than?
Or am I secretly further on his? No, look, friends can absolutely disagree, but one of the things we do agree on is the optimism that we as Australians need to share about this country. This country has very big challenges, and I think that's why the test of, for example, the China Free Trade Agreement, and are we going to embrace free trade, are we going to embrace the world or turn our back on it? That's going to be one of the challenges for Bill Shorten. We both want a better Australia. We'll have quite different views about how to get there, but every one of us wants jobs for our children, we want the elderly looked after, we want a healthy, prosperous Australia. How we get there is perhaps a bit different.
Yeah, Catherine King, we'll actually just start there. I mean, I want to hear about Bill Shorten's character from you briefly, but the free trade agreement's just been raised, and of course Labor has a capacity to hold it up, perhaps all the way through to the next election if you think you need it for an election issue. Do you think that's what will happen, or will there be a decision in the national interest to do something different?
Well, let me talk first just about Bill briefly, and I think that, certainly David's article shows that Bill has an enormous capacity to build partnerships and coalitions across a whole raft of areas, and I've seen it. You saw it in disability, and you've seen it in his Australian Workers' Union days, where he really was quite a moderate in terms of being able to actually broker deals between employers and the union to get the best outcomes for workers. So that is what I've seen on display, and I've known Bill for many years, and it's a great quality to have in both a leader of the opposition and in a Prime Minister, that capacity to do so.
So do you reckon he might be able to cut a deal with the union movement to accept the free trade agreement with China, because that's the greatest stumbling block at the moment?
I think what's interesting, well, the greatest stumbling block at the moment is that, the government has said, and Andrew Robb, who, has said himself, that it is not difficult to build labour market protections into the enabling legislation for the China Free Trade Agreement. He has said that. So all we are saying is, well, then let's do that, because we want to sign up to the China Free Trade Agreement. We actually want to do that, but what we actually want to see is the enabling legislation to build those protections in. Now, I understand that the new Prime Minister and Bill have been in discussions in recent days, and that's exactly what we should be doing. You can't just talk about we need to have bipartisanship. It does mean that the government has to reach out and say, well, OK, where are you worried? What are you worried about? We want to find out. How can we resolve it?
Let's hear from Barnaby Joyce.
That's starting to happen rather than doing this.
His mumbling is getting increasingly loud.
It was all beer and Skittles there for a while till they came out with that. Look, honestly, the Chinese Free Trade Agreement, if we turn this down or look like we're turning it down, and we have to get to Christmas with it passed. If we turn it down, that is hundreds of dollars a head off the price of cattle. This is something that Jay Weatherill, a left-wing Premier, says, for God's sake, get it through. It's something that Daniel Andrews, a left-wing Premier, says, for God's sake, get it through. Anastasia Palaszczuk, another left-wing Premier, says, for God's sake, get it through. What game are they playing with the future, the economic future of our nation?
What game are you playing
by carrying on like this? And they should
more?
actually listen to their own people, such as Craig Emerson, who quite subtly said, if there was a problem, you could deal with it with subsequent legislation.
And that's what we're
asking
you to do.
So they are playing dice with the Australian people on this, and they're playing
Barnaby
dice.
Joyce, can I just interrupt you there, because you made that point about Craig Emerson. He actually said, to be more specific, if you bring in the legislation first, you could pass the agreement without a problem. But so you've actually got it the wrong way around.
He's quite clearly stated that it does not rely that if there are problems with it, you could actually deal with them with subsequent legislation.
So we're asking you to do that.
So what they're actually doing is they're playing this nod and wink game where they're saying, watch out for the hordes of people coming in to take all your jobs, vote for the Australian Labor Party. And that is just deceitful and also disgusting.
Liz-Anne, I'm going to bring you back to Bill Shorten. The question was really about him and his character and the...
But we've just seen why people get fed up with politics.
Yeah, well,
I mean, it's polarisation again.
Come on, you know,
one says this, one says the other. So Bill Shorten, I have met a couple of times. I agree about Beaconsfield. I thought he had an amazing capacity there to communicate and talk to people. And I think time will tell. I have to say, I feel a little sorry now and again for politicians, because that focus on them, on their personal lives, on television, on how they appear, the constant viewing of them rather than listening really to their policies is problematic. So I'm not going to comment on his character other than that.
Fair enough. We've got another question on this subject from Aaron Lovell.
Does the panel think that Bill Shorten can last long enough to make David Marr's recent quarterly essay useful further down the track? Or are we about to witness yet again another death by opinion poll?
David Marr.
One of the things that's new in Australian politics at the moment is that the Labor Party is quiet. And in fact, in some ways, we are back where we were in the last days of the previous Labor governments. The opposition is united and the government is chaotic. The Labor Party is quiet. Bill Shorten is bricked into that position, not just because of the Rudd rules about how you make and break Labor leaders, but also because one of the skills he has, and there are lots of skills he doesn't have, which we might get onto, but one of the skills he does have is to fix up broken institutions. He was very good as a young leader of the AWU, which one union leader described to me as a shot duck when Shorten took it over. He's been very good in the most difficult task imaginable for a political leader, which is to take over the leadership of a party that has just been defeated. This is the graveyard slot for any leader of any party, either side of politics, and he's done it, and he's done it well. And he has, of course, now an incredibly different challenge on his hands, because he's up against somebody who is likeable in Malcolm Turnbull in a way that Tony Abbott was frankly not likeable. But we've yet to discover which of the Malcolm Turnbulls we're actually going to be seeing a few months down the track. Everybody is inventing their own at the moment. He's an art patron. Listen to John. He's going to get rid of penalty rates, and he's going to open the floodgates, and there's going to be tax reform. It's all invention. We've got to actually see what he can do. And the Labor and the government is in some trouble at the moment. Because
You're talking about Shorten?
I'm sorry.
I'll bring you quickly back to your essay, because you spent a great deal of time examining the case against him emerging at the Union Royal Commission. I suppose one of the big threats to Bill Shorten's future is whether there's a seriously adverse finding against him personally, whether, for example, at some point they may find that he has misled or given evidence at the Royal Commission which is contradicted by others. What do you think?
Well, I thought the Royal Commission made an unequivocal and incredibly damaging finding against Shorten, which is that he had failed to declare nearly $60,000 worth of electoral expenses. But oddly, Barnaby, the government is making so little of that. Could it be because other politicians are a bit scared that they may not have completely declared all their electoral expenses? And that bit, which is truly damaging and truly outrageous of Shorten, has all been kind of swept aside. And what we're looking at instead is an area of possible conflicts of interest between the deals done when he was the leader of the AWU, deals that he was simultaneously doing to have employers pay the union for various things and settling the wage rates and conditions for the workers themselves. And that's an important area of possible conflict of interest.
What about evidence, David? Because we know how royal commissions work. They get all your evidence on the record under oath, and then they bring in other witnesses to give their accounts of the same events.
Tony,
and then they test the two pieces of evidence.
Yes, that is how it works. And I'm told, talking to lawyers, not of course Shorten's lawyers, but talking to lawyers, there is nothing emerged before the Royal Commission which truly troubles Shorten at the moment in that conflict of interest area. But Tony, let's wait and see what the evidence is. I mean, you might know what it is. I've got a hint about one or two things that might be coming up, but I don't. But let's see what it is, because
we're going to have to wait very long because it's in 2 weeks'
we're not
time.
going to have to
the AWU comes back on the
all
agenda.
the more reason not to guess now.
John Roskam.
Well, the Royal Commission is a challenge for Bill Shorten, but I think he has a bigger one, which is he inherited a Labor Party which most people don't know what it stands for. When I grew up, I knew what Bob Hawke, what Paul Keating, what they were trying to do to Australia, supported by John Howard. The challenge is any leader, any party must have a principle, must have a philosophy. And what I fear for the Labor Party is it's no longer the party of aspiration. It's no longer the party for the middle class. It's no longer the party for self-improvement. This is the bigger challenge for Bill Shorten. He's inherited a party that now doesn't know what it stands for and is riven between the left and the right. This is Bill Shorten's challenge. The Royal Commission is absolutely secondary to that challenge.
Catherine King. Oh, yes, go on. No, David, quickly, and then
Can I tell a secret? The night of the election of Bob Hawke, Bill Shorten came around and watched it on television at the Roskam's house. And they and they were filled with hope for the future, the pair of them.
And optimism.
Optimism and hope for the future.
That was used a lot tonight. Catherine King.
Well, I think that the fact that you've actually seen, just in the last couple of weeks, our higher education policy, the work that Bill and Kim Carr has done on that is really all about aspiration for the future. How do you actually make sure that we have a skilled workforce into the future? That's one of our biggest policy announcements to date. And in essence, for the last 2 years, whilst the government has been thrashing around on a whole range of areas, we've been working towards how do you get a productive economy? How do you actually get people in jobs? We've seen announcements from Bill already about science, technology, engineering and maths, and about what you need to do there. We've been trying to stop some of the government's worst excesses, frankly, when it comes to healthcare, when it comes to $1,000 university degrees, and John will disagree with me of them being bad. So, we've actually been getting on with things and actually developing and building, and in essence, to some extent, governing in default, frankly, is what I would think
but
that we've been doing.
But as of yet, you haven't explained how you're going to pay for your policies. I'll go to Barnaby Joyce.
Look, I think it would be more honest than this. Bill Shorten is finished, and it's just a matter of when it's going to happen.
Have you still got your house? Didn't you say Tony Abbott was still going to lead us to the end of the election? Have you still got your house, mate?
They always talk over the top of you when they know you're telling the truth.
No, I'm just amused.
So
what a ridiculous thing to say.
It's quite perverse to think that once Malcolm Turnbull got elected, it was quite obvious that Bill Shorten just doesn't have the goods to get that connection with the Australian people, and everybody knows on a one-on-one Malcolm Turnbull's going to beat him. So really the question is now they're going to have three parts to this replacement. First thing is that they will get into the Labor Party room and rescind the Rudd process, the Rudd motion, and then they will declare the positions vacant, and then they will elect a different leader, and that will happen before the next election. They are scheming and plotting now, and if you go behind it with just what they said, just what they said then, what are the policies of the Labor Party? Can anybody name one policy of the Labor Party? I mean, in agriculture, we're just sitting there waiting for them to come forward with something.
What's happened to your white paper,
something
mate?
of
It's
worth.
sunk like a stone.
It's something of worth. Well, I'd love to go through it. We can go through the 800,000.
Hang on, Barnaby.
She opened up.
I'm sorry.
You opened up
Because there's quite a bit.
Let's actually move from politics to policy. Our next question comes from Kay Matthews.
This is a question for Catherine King. The government has actually announced a major review of Medicare. The review has variously been described as an attack on the integrity of doctors or long overdue. The review is going to be chaired by Bruce Robinson, Professor Bruce Robinson from Sydney University Medical School. And he has suggested that something like 30% of expenditure is wasted on services and tests that are unnecessary, that are a waste of time, and at times can actually be unsafe or even dangerous. What is the public supposed to make? Are we supposed to be worried about this review?
Yeah, well,
which is, of course, the topic of tonight's Four Corners program.
Yeah, of course. And look, the first thing to say is no, you shouldn't be worried about the fact that there is a review of the Medicare benefit schedule. It is the right thing to do. My concern, I do have to say, is that the government has gone about it in the wrong way. This is work Labor did start in government. We actually developed with Adam Elshaug, a fellow who might have seen on the Four Corners program tonight, a framework to actually look at, well, what are the sort of low value care, the things that the evidence isn't there anymore for, and what might you need to do about that? And then slowly and systematically we were working our way through some of those items, and in some cases they got removed or the rules changed and you wouldn't have heard about them. In other cases, people might remember with cataract surgery, we got into a pretty big stoush in government with the ophthalmologist and had to go back to the table and negotiate with them. My worry is the way in which the government's handled this, particularly over the weekend, is that they've managed to get, the AMA offside, which is not the wisest thing to do when you're actually needing to have them at the table to actually start to work through some of these issues. The figure around 30% is actually a contested figure. It's a figure that actually has come out of the United States, which has a very different MBS schedule to us. So you've got to be a bit cautious about that.
Do you have a figure in mind?
No, and I think, well, it's interesting. Adam Elshaug's work shows, he said about 150 procedures out of the 5,700 he's almost back in 2012 he identified. And so things like x-rays for low back pain. The best thing that you can do as a consumer, and I think it's really important, is to actually ask questions of your medical professional and to really ask the question about whether this is necessary or not, and make sure that you have that relationship with them to talk it through. I think the review will be obviously ongoing. I think the government's got a real challenge on its hands in the way in which it's actually handled it.
Can I just interrupt there? Are you saying the problem is they're going to review the whole 5,700 rather than just 150? I mean, wouldn't you want to have a close look at the whole system?
You do want to have a look at this whole system, but you have to take a pretty cautious approach to it. And our lived experience in government is you've got to bring the clinicians on with you, or you don't get the change and you end up in an almighty stoush with them and patients end up in the middle. The other thing that's really important about it, and the reason some of the clinicians are concerned, is that the money needs to be invested back in health. So, for example, we know coming down the pathway there's going to be an application to put on the MBS new genetic testing for some 50 cancers. Like, why would you not want to start to actually look at how you get that new technology and get that onto the MBS much more quickly and invest any savings you might make through the review back into health?
Because
and
we've got to find the savings.
And unfortunately what the problem is the government has said, and they've said today, that they're going to use some of the savings for budget repair not to go back into health.
Okay, well, Barnaby Joyce wanted to jump in on that point specifically.
10 years ago, what was it, about 9 billion? Now it's about 19 billion.
Figures.
And now that's part of a total budget of 69 billion. I grant you that, yes, that we have to find savings, and you find savings by going through this review. And once more, the Labor Party, which you're representing ably here tonight, says, look, we know there's a problem, but we don't agree with the way you're going about it, but these are all the other wonderful things we want to do if we found the money. Well, we're going out finding the money. That's why we're having the review. And if we don't have the review,
back into health.
If we don't have the review, part of the process of
every dollar will go back into health.
If I spoke over her, that would be rude, wouldn't it?
Well, calling me her in that way probably isn't also particularly polite.
But of course,
Catherine, we might just pause to let Barnaby Joyce make his point.
And Catherine brings up the issue of budget repair. Yeah, of course, we've got a budget repair job. That's because they left us in this position where we're on the trajectory to a financial cliff. And we had to try and turn things around. Because, as you all know, if we run out of money, then there is no Medicare because we have no money. There is also no health system, no education system, no defence, nothing. We have to, of course, turn the show around.
But Barnaby,
it's part of the job of a responsible government.
Can I just interrupt to raise the question that Catherine was just raising with you then? I mean, it's clear from what the premiers are saying that there's a huge hole in medical funding, Medicare funding. There's a huge hole. It's in the billions. So if you make savings, why wouldn't you put them back into the system?
Well, part of the role is to put money back into the system, but it's also to try and repair the budget as it is. We just can't have this exponential growth. The growth in the cost is way beyond the growth in our population. I think it was like a 20% growth in the population corresponded to about 100% growth in the cost. And everybody knows that that's just not sustainable. You can't go on like that. And therefore you have to be logical and say, well, let's do this in two forms. We've got to find the savings that we can then better allocate to more effective forms of medical expenditure. But we've also got to fix the budget. Everybody in every section is now forced into this dilemma of having to try and fix the predicament that Labor left us in.
Let's hear from the other panellists. And David Marr, quickly from you.
I think it's absolutely splendid idea. Let's have a look at the medical procedures, techniques, etc. that don't work. It's just perfectly straightforward, and there's a lot of expensive stuff coming online. And I would have thought that you put the savings back into the medical system, but I can't see how anybody can object to a scientific evaluation by the medical profession itself of whether what they're doing is good for and useful for patients.
John Roskam.
David's right. The Greens support this review, and it comes to what we were talking about before, but yet Labor somehow is unsure, not clear what it should do about it. It should be reviewed, absolutely.
Yeah, and we have said that consistently, and what the Greens have also said, exactly the same as we have, you should need to invest the savings back into the healthcare system. And that's part of the problem that's actually occurred with the government. They're not saying that's what they're going to do. And that's why they're in a stash with the doctors.
Lizanne, what do you think, listening to the discussion we're having here?
It's not an unusual one. We're not alone. Look at the British healthcare system has the same issues. As we get more technologically advanced and as we age and we stay more healthy longer, then there's going to be much greater demand, and hard decisions are going to have to be made. I grew up with universal healthcare in the UK. It's just no longer viable, and really we need to get both sides. This is an issue about our health. You know, this is one issue where really both sides should get round the table and try and at least find some common ground which can go forward rather than wasting time in ping pong.
Let's move on. We've got another question. This one's from Imogen D'Souza.
Okay, so today is the Global Day of Action for Access to Safe and Legal Abortions. Yeah. And currently in New South Wales, 87% of voters agree that it should be a woman's right to determine the status of her own pregnancy. So if this is the case, why is abortion still subject to criminal law in all states except the ACT? And when can we expect to see change on the subject?
Barnaby, Joyce.
Well, we all know that this is an issue which everybody has, I don't think, has thought about deeply. We all have our different views. I think we have to respect each other's views. My views is that a life is to be respected, whether it's inside the womb or outside the womb. I know that's different to others, and I'm confirmed of that view, and I hold that view. And I've thought long and hard about it, and it's not based on a religious principle. It's based on me going back through my life and saying, when did I attain the rights that I have now? At what point did that happen?
I'm just going to bring you to the question, though, which is that abortion happens, as you know, regularly in this country, but it isn't a woman's right in Australia for the most part, except in, let's say, the ACT. In New South Wales and Queensland, it's still a crime unless a doctor agrees that the woman's life or mental health will be impacted. And so it's really not a woman's right to choose. I guess that's what the questioner wants to see change. What do you say?
Well, I've said what my view is. My view is that at what point in my life did someone have the right to have a greater right over my life than me? And I can't find that point. Therefore, I don't agree in abortion.
Nor that women should have any right to choose what happens with their own body.
Well, this is a discussion, I think, Tony, that is not really for Q&A. It could occupy a whole discussion piece itself. It's probably one of the most profound discussions that people have, and you're approaching it from your view. Other people will approach it from theirs, and I think that it's one that there's one thing certain: it'll draw up the emotions of the night.
Lizanne.
I think there is clearly a double standard operating here, because we all know it's happening, and yet it's not. There is still this risk of criminalisation, I guess. So I think it is a problem, and I think it needs to be discussed. And regardless what side of the debate you come down on, the fact is that that is not right. Either it should be allowed or it should not be allowed. And so I think there is a double standard operating, and it needs to be looked at. And it is, Barnaby's absolutely right. It's a really difficult issue. But it is absolutely, I'm sure it's no secret what side of the argument I would come down on, a very, very difficult one, but one that I do think needs clarification under the law.
Yeah. Catherine King.
I think it should be removed from the criminal codes of every single jurisdiction. It should not be. This is the 21st century, and frankly, it shouldn't be in the criminal codes at all.
Why wasn't it tackled at a federal level by two Labor administrations?
It sort of can't, because there's state laws. So you see in Victoria there was a very big debate about that.
Even the call for this to happen.
Yeah, well again it's a conscience vote within our party, and I have a very firm view that it should not be a crime for women to access safe, lawful terminations of pregnancy and have a choice and have rights over their own bodies, frankly.
John Roskam.
We should have the discussion, but in Victoria, where abortion was decriminalised, doctors lost freedom of conscience. So that's a second aspect to this debate. I share Barnaby's views. There are also limits. There must be limits to the right to choose. So we have to have the discussion, and we need to look at what's happened in Victoria before we change the law in New South Wales or Queensland.
Before we go, the other panellists got another question on this topic. It's from Joshua Gresh. I'll bring Joshua in.
Regarding the proposed over-the-phone abortion service for women living in regional and remote areas, do you believe that this service will be marred in controversy or remain in place, giving the women the options that they are entitled to?
David, can I bring you in?
Abortion laws are one of the now quite small group of laws in this country where religious belief is directly expressed through criminal law. My view is that they should all go, and that the criminal law has no place in this area. And I myself cannot see why the decision whether to terminate the extremely painful, personal, difficult decision about terminating a pregnancy can't be made over the phone when necessary from a remote area. I don't see that introduces any new moral principle. This is something that can be done just as any other medical procedures can be advised over the phone as well. I don't see the problem.
Barnaby, Joyce, this has particularly been devised for people in rural and remote areas and regional areas that don't have access easily to the services that are in cities. What do you say?
Well, I think it's once more, it's a profound question. What do we talk about in the last trimester? How do we present the idea of late-term abortion? How do we say to someone, well, that if that baby was born, it'd be viable? Do we have this discussion over a phone? I think it's a bit more complicated than that.
Catherine King.
Yep. So the story today is that a service provider wants to provide access to clinical care via teleconferencing for medical abortions by RU486. And it seems to me a very sensible proposition to be able to make sure that you are extending that service, so long as all of the clinical safeguards are in place, that actually does occur. For some states and territories, however, it will mean that service won't be possible. So for the Northern Territory, for example, if you want to have a termination, you must do it within a hospital. So it will not be available for some of those for women in those areas. And I think certainly women that I've talked to in those areas are very distressed about that and want to see a change in the Northern Territory to access to what is a safe procedure, so long as all of the clinical checks are in place.
Barnaby, Joyce, I'm not sure that we finally got your position on this completely. The telephone service. Yeah. No, I don't mean that as an amusing way.
I don't agree to it. I think it's something that's for a whole range of reasons. If something is that serious, I think it warrants you meeting somebody face to face and having that discussion. And this idea of I'm going to talk to you over the phone about probably one of the most profound decisions of your life just doesn't wash with me.
Okay, let's move along. Our next question comes from Nathan Lenton.
Barnaby Joyce, in 2009, the Nationals spearheaded a campaign against emissions trading, arguing that for Australia to act before the rest of the world would put us at an economic disadvantage. China has since announced that it will be introducing its own nationwide emissions trading scheme. Do you think this gives Australia scope to enter the carbon trading market without being at a disadvantage?
Barnaby?
It was to, you. I seem to remember your name at the beginning of that question, yes.
We have a process in place now. You take the China position. China, from 2005, I think, to 2030, will have a 150% increase in carbon emissions with their trading scheme. We will have between a 26 and a 28% reduction in our emissions on 2005 levels without a trading scheme under our current process. Now, what you should really be asking is not the philosophy of whether you have a trading scheme or not, but the outcome of what you want to present. Now, if we're reducing carbon emissions in the process that we're following, then that is the result that really matters, and that's what we'll continue to do.
Ultimately, if a more, can we say, progressive cabinet took the view that an emissions trading scheme was worth having another look at, if higher emissions reduction targets were, for example, decided on in Paris, and it was felt that paying for it from direct action just wouldn't work, would you at all be prepared to reconsider your position?
It's hypothetical. I'll take it as a comment.
No, not me.
No, look. There's a whole lot of ifs and buts there, Tony. I mean,
that's because we don't know what the new cabinet's going to be like.
We have stated that, and Malcolm has stated that we'll continue on with the carbon reduction process that we currently have, and that's been signed into, and also the coalition agreement with the National Party. This is, and one of the reasons we do it is because it's vastly cheaper and vastly more effective. I mean, why would we come up with a proposition that's less effective and just costs you a lot more money? I mean, if we can easily, if you want to just go back to the Labor Party and jam it on your power bill, we can do that. If people want to say, oh, we want to put up our power bills and have a less effect than what we're currently getting at the moment, well, sure, we can do that. But do you want that?
Let's. I'll go to John Roskam. Pro-business think tank. Do you think a market-based system like a carbon trading system would be a better way of dealing with emissions?
Oh, not necessarily, and it's a question of what do we want to achieve. I mean, China is going to go to Paris and they're going to say they'll still be increasing their emissions up to 2030. China has several hundred coal-fired power stations on the drawing board right now. We have to remember Labor lost an election, Labor lost a leader, the Liberals lost a leader over the carbon tax. The polls tell us Australians want their carbon emissions reduced, but they also say they don't want to pay for it. They don't want to pay for it. So Australia already has amongst the highest electricity prices in the world. If we're going to do something like this, and I doubt the efficacy anyway, direct action may well be the best way to go.
So your philosophical position is it's better that the public pay for the polluters to reduce their pollution?
Well, yes.
Okay. David Marr.
In tens of thousands of homes in Australia right now, Tony, the fact checkers are going berserk at Barnaby's claim that the government scheme is cheap and effective. It is grossly expensive. It is a huge drain on the revenue. Its effectiveness is extremely questionable. It can, of course, be geared up in various ways to make it much more effective. And one would hope that the new Prime Minister would have some ideas along that line, except that to get the job, Malcolm Turnbull had to promise never to have an emissions trading scheme, not for the length of this government, but for the entire time that he is Prime Minister. And that was the promise he got out of that man's party. So while Malcolm Turnbull is Prime Minister, we can't have anything that really looks like an ETS, which seems to be quite a cheap and relatively effective. I mean, there are lots of odd things about it, but it seems to work. And a lot of big places like California and China and all of Europe seem to think it's a good idea. But it's another one of these specialnesses of Australia. You know, equal marriage works everywhere else in the world, but somehow it doesn't work here. Cap and trade works everywhere else. but somehow it doesn't work here. You know, it's a crazy world we live in, ladies and gentlemen. How much political capital is this government willing to squander to resist the wish of the Australian people that something effective be done about global warming?
Now, Barnaby, you do get a right of reply there.
Well, I think the Australian people don't want to have to... I mean, it's... Until you put it on your price of your power and you say, well, how much are you prepared to pay? Do you want it to go up by $20 a month, $40, $60, $100? What do you want us to put on your power bills? Because we can do it at a federal level. If that's what you want, people want to vote for it. And when we came into power, they didn't want it. It was one of the promises we made, we'd get rid of it. And we're overwhelmingly endorsed in that. So the Australian people have had their say. They didn't want it on the price of their power, and we took it off the price of their power, and we did find a cheaper way to do it. And that is, I think, it is really about the outcome. If we are achieving what we set out to do, what meets our international obligations, and we are doing it in a way that saves you money, then surely that is the way we should do it, because he's not correct. All they did was they just chucked it on the price of your power and said, there's the solution.
It's back to how you put the arguments, though. It is possible for the Australian public to be given the arguments properly and not scaremongered. And then maybe if we all put the propositions out there and we agree that for the sake of the planet and those coming after us, we need to do something and it might cost a little bit more money, let's put it in those terms, not, ooh, scare, bills are going to go up, vote against it. So it's back to how you present it, and it depends whether we have the political leadership with the will to follow. Now we're following the rest of the world because the rest of the world is endorsing it. Germany is not a left-wing nation, has endorsed it. Huge renewables, huge investment and shifting away from traditional fossil fuels.
Okay, we've got a few hands have gone up. There's a gentleman up there with his hand up. Go ahead.
You're talking about, Barnaby, outcomes. I'd have thought that a market-based system is going to ultimately change people's behaviour and affect the outcome and consumption of electricity.
You're dead right. When you say a market-based system, see, the whole point of it, it's a pricing system. If we put up the price of power, you use less of it. Now, that makes a lot of sense if you can afford it. But for the National Party, we deal with the poorest people. And the idea that we get an inelastic product, such as power, because you can't cook half of dinner or decide to cook only half your toast or turn on half your light. If we decide that what we are going to do in that household is make an essential part of their life dearer, and we decide that that is a moral outcome, it is not. That is basically getting someone who's at the lower part of in the lower section of the socioeconomic climate, and saying, well, we're going to make the poorer people poorer.
But Barnaby, can I just interrupt here? $2 billion of taxpayers' money currently being used for the direct action to produce a 5% reduction, and that may work. How do you get to 26 to 28%? What's the cost of that?
Well, to
the public dollar.
Well, even in the last, we have to just go on what we're doing. Greg Hunt in that last tranche, of actually being able to create the mechanism for carbon reduction, he did it at a vastly cheaper rate, and in fact, it's a spectacularly cheaper rate than even our modelling said would be able to do it.
But can we just get this straight though? There's $2 billion sum of money to produce a 5% reduction.
The alternative is
how much for 28? Do you know how? Do we know how much it's going to cost to produce a 28% reduction?
We know that on the modelling that we've got, by 2030, it will be between 26 and 28% reduction on 2005 levels, and China will be 150% above where they are.
But how much will it cost the budget?
And when you talk about a taxation process, the taxation process is to deal with people where those who are richer pay more tax. But if you want to pay it on your power bill, it is a pricing mechanism. It puts up the price of power so you cannot afford it, or people can afford less.
But if you pay for it from the budget, how much will it cost?
You're asking me to be the Environment Minister between now and 2030.
No, I just think everyone in the Cabinet will presumably know these figures.
Well, I've given it to you. That it's between a 26 and 28% reduction by 2030.
No, but how much will that cost?
Well, Tony, if we had taken what we predicted the last reduction to cost, we've actually attained our goals. We did it vastly cheaper. I think we did it for about a tenth the price. So I can't tell you now and every year for the next 3 decades what those costs are going to be. And I think it's rather absurd you asking me that.
Well, maybe. We're going to move on to another subject completely. We've got a question from Audrey Marsh.
The denial of Chris Brown's visa has been described as inconsistent, misguided and racist. Do you believe that it is an appropriate use of the visa character test?
David Marr, I'll start with you and just give us a quick update on this story. Chris Brown has posted on Facebook, "Don't listen to the bullshit, I'm coming." We're talking about Chris Brown, R&B star.
I think it's much in the style of those of Johnny Depp's dogs. You know, they're going to come. I loved what Barnaby did about those dogs. Isn't it great? You know. Australia can have rabies. Australia can have rabies if a film star brings it in with these dogs. What is it about these singers? It's what's the style of music that they sing again?
Hip hop, R&B.
Yes. People of my age, rap. Thank you. People of my age remember there was a problem with Snoop Dogg a few years ago. Remember, Snoop Dogg was also considered an unworthy person. He had convictions as well. Look, all countries, well, most countries have character tests of one kind or another about who can get visas to come into them. And Australia has Australia has a system. The United States has an incredibly tough system. And the question is, are we going to start making examples of musicians because they do things which everybody in this room would find distasteful? He was not sentenced to any term of imprisonment. What he did is completely foul and horrible, and that may well be true of his music as well. But I'm not sure that Australia does much good for itself or for the cause of domestic violence by making these kinds of judgments.
Liz-Anne, can I ask you, here's an artist accused of domestic violence, and the question is, in this environment in Australia, should he be allowed to come here?
Well,
does he pass the character test?
Definitely doesn't pass the character test, that's for sure. And I am all for setting examples and saying we will not accept this kind of behaviour. But having said that, I don't know where we're going to draw the line. What happens if countries reciprocate and some of our sports players go overseas? It's not going to be pretty, is it? So I think we maybe need to get our own house in order before we start banning other people.
Barnaby.
Well, obviously, this is an argument I have with one of my daughters who wants him to come in. God help us. But he has served 5 years probation in the US. We have said that we have an intent not to let him in. He now has to prove that he is worthy of coming in the door. So we'll leave it in the laps of the lap of the
lapdogs. That's where you got into trouble. That's where you got into trouble last time.
Just on that. You know that if they had New Statesman, which I read from time to time, their big issue in England was that they believe that rabies is going to come into England by reason of people bringing in lapdogs. 55,000 people died of rabies last year around the globe. We can't just change the laws because someone's a movie star.
Here.
Let's move to our last question, related subject anyway, from Ruby Lou.
Prime Minister Turnbull has committed $100 million to a domestic violence action plan. Why are we seeing this funding directed to CCTV cameras in violent homes instead of to emergency accommodation or primary prevention programs or legal centres?
Catherine King, start with you. And we've got a little time for this.
It's a really important question. Our services are already overwhelmed and women are being turned away every single day. The money needs to go to services.
And is it your understanding that it won't?
That is absolutely our understanding. The bulk of the money is going towards CCTV cameras and other measures. Some of them are very good measures, particularly some of the safe at home measures. Some of them are good measures, but the issue is really about how do we get funding into these services. The fact that women are being turned away who are in desperate circumstances is something we really have to do something about.
Barnaby, Joyce, should there be another look at how this money is being spent?
Well, we've found $100 million. I don't think $100 million is going to fix the problem. It's going to assist. Deals with issues such as tracking, GPS tracking, putting basically the GPS tracking device on your ankle so that you don't go near the house where the lady is. When women present at a hospital and they've been beaten up, the capacity for them to get immediate legal advice rather than go back to that house where the problem is, where all of a sudden it apparently evaporates because they're intimidated into shutting up. Making sure that we have even a line so that guys who think they can't control themselves have a capacity to ring up and deal with that issue. More shelters so that people have a refuge to go to. But I don't think for one moment $100 million is going to fix it. It's one of those things why the budgets are so precious. When you find money, you can do good things with it, but you've got to be able to save and you've got to be prudent so we can find the money. I think ultimately it's a cultural change and we're all got to be part of that. And this might seem a bit quaint and a bit whoopee, but I think we've got to start changing our attitude all the time and how we deal with women. Like, don't swear in front of them. It's not politically incorrect to open a door. All these things so we can change the attitude so we can show that we respect people. Because if you don't respect from a younger age, then how are you going to develop it later on?
Lizanne?
I think the education campaigns need to start in the schools. There's been some great initiatives at state level around this, but thanks to some young women, some children at school who've actually campaigned for curriculum to deal with domestic violence. I think it's incredibly important. But the issue of the shelters, I couldn't agree with you more, Catherine. I mean, as a result of the cuts that we've seen previously, a lot of these shelters have had shut, and we've all heard terribly distressing stories about women in dire need. But let's say it's 100 million is not going to fix it, but it's a really good start. And it was Malcolm Turnbull talking about it holistically, about respect for women, about equality, about all the other issues that needs to be part of the agenda.
John Roskam?
I don't think anyone thinks $100 million is the end of the story, and I'd actually differ a little with my co-panellists on this. I think there is a powerful signal to send to say to Chris Brown, what you did is inappropriate. He has come to Australia since the convictions. He's been here a couple of times. But since then, we've begun to change our attitudes and our approach. If he has to be made an example of, then I'm for it.
David Marr.
Whatever good things this money brings, it has to bring shelters. If you don't have somewhere to go, you're done for. You've got to be able to get out. You've got to be able to get your kids out. And oddly enough, at times, you've also got to be able to get your pets out. You've got to escape. And if the money does not cover shelter and escape, it is not getting to the fundamentals. And perhaps, Barnaby, there needs to be some education in schools to teach people to walk through doors ahead of women. I don't.
I think maybe we've got to stop. That's the thing, David. If you get to a point where you just ridicule everything, we are trying as much as possible to create an area where you build back into society that sense of respect.
So I agree with you completely, but the slip
is highly less likely that someone is going to belt someone in the face if they've been brought up in an environment where you've got to respect women.
I absolutely agree with you, but I really do not think that the slippery slope starts by standing back and allowing a woman through the door first. I really do not.
Well, okay, all right. Do it in your way, we'll do it in ours.
That's one of those insoluble politeness questions we're going to have to leave for tonight. That's all we have time for. Please thank our panel, David Marr, John Roskam, Catherine King, Barnaby Joyce and Elizabeth Ann Macgregor. Thank you very much. Next Monday, a very special edition of Q&A as part of the ABC's Mental As Week with the founding head of Beyond Blue, Ian Hickey, former AFL star Wayne Schwass, who's established the Sunrise Foundation to educate kids on mental health, Faye Jackson, who's wrestled with her own mental illness to build a career as an advocate for mental health, Indigenous psychologist Pat Dudgeon and Professor Roderick Mackay, who specialises, that's McKay, I think, who specialises in the impact of depression on older Australians. Plus, we'll be finishing the program with a live performance by Gurrimal and Paul Kelly that's bound to lift your spirits. So until next week's Q&A, good night.